So I recently saw Paragon Armory's very excellent video on tappet plates and spring strings and feeding and midcap syndrome and so on. Midcap syndrome has been an issue the last 5-8 years, especially ever since the P-Max came out with the very strong springs. Midcap syndrome happens when the nozzle gets stuck on the second BB in the BB stack. Don't worry. Anyway, the nozzle comes here and it pushes the first BB and it can't get over the bump of the second BB. Maybe I can draw it out a bit better. So you have the BB stack here, and you have the hop-up chamber. BBs want to go this way. When the nozzle comes in and pushes the BB through here, so that's the nozzle. This edge right here of the nozzle is actually hitting the second BB in the stack. And there's some slow motion videos on YouTube where you can see a better example of this. So why does this happen? Because it seems like a pretty obvious mechanical problem. Well, the thing is, you're working with tolerances and some inner diameters here in the hop-up chamber that actually makes it quite difficult because you have the size of the nozzle, the inner diameter of the chamber, you have the hop-up bucking as well, and the nozzle has to seal here and it has to go over here and so on. Now, a lot of people say, and this is something I wanted to touch on in this video, is it's an advantage if you take the nozzle and and you glue it on here. There is something to be said for that. Yeah, then it sits more stable, it sits more centered and so on. But in my opinion, and what I found over the years is when you have a nozzle that's trying to go in here and trying to get over the second BB with the pressure from the magazine, it's not really about having it straight. What you actually want is you want to have the nozzle right the top of the hop-up chamber, because it will do that, because you have the cylinder head tube here, and you have the nozzle riding on the cylinder head tube, and from here to here, or even here, you have a pressure on it, and there's no support, so it is going to tilt up. And when you try to hold this with the tappet plate, instead of, what happens is that you're actually trying to force it over the second BB rather than just letting the nozzle ride over the BB, well, over the second BB as it should. So really, the loading system should look more like this. Now we have a second BB that's being loaded a little bit. The nozzle should actually sit somewhere like this. Right. This is an extreme example, but you actually want the nozzle to ride the top of the hop-up chamber instead. You should see it more as stacking various parts from the top down. Because then you allow the nozzle to ride over the second BB. So if you try to force it down with a cylinder head tube here, you're going to get a lot of wear in the cylinder head tube. You're going to get a lot of leverage. Basically, when the BB pushes up here, it's got leverage with the nozzle because the nozzle is so long. And that means you have a lot of friction and wear on the cylinder head tube. Sometimes they even break. Rare, but I've seen it happen. So just let it be loose and let it be guided by the hop-up unit, and instead focus on the hop-up unit. That ties into the width of the hop-up chamber and the nozzle. So The problem you have here is you have a tolerance that starts at the center of the chamber and expands outwards. So, but the diameter of the BB doesn't follow that. So, right, I make a bigger chamber here. So if we say this is a 7mm ID, then you'll have the BB that is 6mm will sit like this, and the second BB will sit like this. This means that the second BB is protruding into the loading area a little bit. So if you have a nozzle that actually matches this perfectly, then you're getting a conflict between the tolerance here. So it's actually better to have a nozzle that's a little bit smaller and it can tilt and go over. One way that you could avoid this, and really it's more at a manufacturer level, is to have a narrow tolerance in here where the BB is loaded. Because when this tolerance is narrow, then the first and the second BB gets pushed further down. And the nozzle, so basically you have, instead of having the wall down here, you would have it up here instead. And then the BB can go centered in and go over the second BB. That never happens because the problem is you also need to have some space to have the hop-up bucking actually sealed. You can't have 6mm all the way because then the nozzle will just go through the bucking. There needs to be right here and right here. There needs to be a gap. Well, not a gap, but there needs to be a step in tolerance like this. And then the nozzle goes here and it can hit the bucking. So if you imagine this is the bucking lips, and this is the bucking lips, and this is the wall of the hop-up chamber, and the nozzle has to be able to come in here and actually touch the front of the lips, because otherwise you would just have a 6mm tube all the way, and you had like a 5.9 OD nozzle and a 6mm ID tube all the way, and you would have no Airseal. So that doesn't work. So it needs to be stepped down inside. As an end user, you can't really change much about this, but you can keep an eye on it and make sure that what you buy has the best tolerances. Another thing you can do is you can think about why you're using a flat and why you're using a conical. So when you have, let's see here. And you have the first BB sitting here, you have the second BB sitting there. This one's bigger. Someone squeezed an 8mm. If you have, screw it, let's draw it this way. Right, here's the BB, here's the nozzle. All right. So the nozzle is trying to push into the BB and either push the BB down, or, well, it sort of has to push the BB down and then move past the BB. So this here is the problem. You have a corner that's pushing into a flat surface. And what that means is if the nozzle is allowed to go up or even sits high or has a lower ID, correction OD, it would look something like this. Now it's almost at the top and it has an easier time to slide over it. If the nozzle is wider or the BB sits further up, it'll look more like this. Now this is an extreme example. And this one is actually a potato. But the point is, depending on the height of the nozzle, it'll hit with a corner on a round surface in different heights and therefore different angles. And that makes it more difficult for the nozzle to slide over the BB. And if you check the slow motion videos on YouTube, you can see the same problem. Now, what can you do about this with the nozzle? If you have a flat nozzle, or you have a conical nozzle, Obviously, the conical nozzle will have a way easier time sliding over an object than the flat nozzle. So conical nozzles will have a way easier time to load BBs, especially when there is problems with midcap syndrome. However, a conical nozzle is also effectively longer. And when I say longer, obviously that seems a bit weird because you could take the flat one and just make it conical and then it's not longer. But the thing is with the Airseal, a flat one, if you have the bucking, a flat nozzle can seal out here. But a conical nozzle has to move all the way in here to seal at the same points. So this means that a conical nozzle needs longer travel, which conversely means that the conical nozzle will need to travel further back. And you put in the conical nozzle and it's a bit longer, so it needs to travel further back to actually clear the BB stack so the BB can go past. So my long-term experience with flat versus conical is that as long as you don't have midcap syndrome issues, a flat nozzle will seal better and feed way better. And there's so many guns. I built a ton of M4s where I always used the old XM177 nozzles because they tended to be a bit more flat on the front. And that gave me just as fine airseal and way better feeding in many cases. Business-wise, there's also a couple of examples. The AEG Scorpion Evo also uses a absolutely super 90-degree flat nozzle, and it, as everyone who's worked with it knows, it has amazing airseal, accuracy is just fine, and it always feeds super well. So flat nozzles can work. It's always an estimate. I would say if anyone out there have issues with feeding an airseal and the issue and no issues with midcap syndrome, try a flat nozzle before you start doing all kinds of tricks. Tricks like shaving the front of a tappet plate so it goes further forward. That is an OG trick, but it's not always the best idea. Another problem is if you take a sector gear and you say, oh, I'll put a delayer chip on it with a bigger radius so it'll draw the tappet further back. Well, then you sometimes run into issues with actually impacting the front of the cylinder head with the back of the tappet. So it doesn't really work either. It is a very limited system to work with. At best, you can optimize the distances, but the feeding gains come from matching nozzle and hopper bucking and all this together, so it has just enough. It's just deep enough to have the airseal it needs, and then the rest is just pulling back so it's got a wider window for air sealing, correction feeding. There is something to say for tappet spring string. There's been times where I had a gun and the tappet spring was kind of weak and I put in a stronger one and it fit a bit better. But honestly, that's a band-aid. The best thing is to solve it out here with changing the nozzle or the hop-up chamber and having a look at how that all fits together. These are band-aids, and as Paragon Armory also mentioned, you put in one that's too strong and it's just going to end up snapping the actual tappet plate off or destroying the spring itself. It is not a good solution. That's not how the TM spec works. Another thing is midcap versus high cap. So midcap syndrome tends to happen when you have a midcap that feeds really strongly. And 5-8 years ago, I can't remember, the 160 or 200 round midcaps came out from PTS, and they're great. They look nice. They're really solid. They generally feed very well, but there's there's so many people that have so many issues with these magazines. Um, I wouldn't go out and say another manufacturer's product is faulty, so I'm going to be a bit careful there, because many people do like the product and it does work and it does do what it says it does. But I found that it's not optimal in all cases, in all use cases with all AEGs for these reasons. So you can't always say, oh yeah, it's the magazine, or oh yeah, it's the hub-up. It's like you have to go in and look at it. Well, what nozzle is in it? What angle does it go in at? Sometimes you have a gearbox inside the AEG body that sits tilted forward or tilted upward. And too much either way can cause feeding issues or airseal issues. And especially if you have one that's pointed downwards, then you tend to get a bit more feeding issues because now you're hitting into the lowest part of the second BB. So I've actually solved some feeding issues sometimes by putting shims in and getting the gearbox to sit at the correct angle. Luckily, manufacturers make better guns these days, so not so big of a deal. I would say if you have magazines with very strong springs in them and you have to like force it and you're almost breaking this thing on your speed loader or whatever, or you look like the Hulk when you're winding your Odin loader, consider using a different magazine, honestly. I tried a lot of magazines, and way back in the day, there was a brand called Mag. I don't know how much they still exist, but their designs are being sold by some distributors in packs of 8 or 10 magazines for no money. This is an example of it from, I think this is AEG. It's rated for 140 rounds. I put about 100, 120 rounds in it. They feed amazing. You can feed these at 30, 40, 50 rounds a second if you know what you're doing. They're so cheap that if I drop one in the field, I don't care. If one breaks, I don't care. They don't weigh anything in my setup, and honestly, they feed really well, and they're also pretty sturdy. Like, considering it's just a 2-piece plastic construction, it's pretty sturdy. I've thrown these around. Yeah, those are my words on it. Don't get locked into looking at one thing. Definitely consider flat versus conical. If you have mid-cap issues, have a look at seeing if you can switch from a flat to a conical nozzle. Yeah. Thanks for listening. If you like this kind of stuff, let me know. This is the first video I've pretty much ever done. I'm not this kind of guy. I just build guns. I don't make videos. But if you like it, if you got any pointers for me, yeah, let me know.